Hello everyone! I want to start by acknowledging that yes, I'm selling a product, but the point of this video is not to try and encourage you or persuade you to buy my product. I'll actually be showing you later in the video how to do this exact mod for yourself if you already have the radio and the parts and an ounce of extremely basic electronics knowledge. So yeah, just wanted to say that. I'm not just trying to shill. This was born out of a passion project, and I just want to make this knowledge accessible for people who want a radio that sounds better. That out of the way, what am I talking about? Well, I listen to a lot of radio. And for months, my main unit was the Walkman SRF-29, late 80s. Sounds really good. It does have a well-known and documented issue with the volume knob, where it wears out over time, as a small potentiometer would be expected to. But working around that, I actually really liked its sound, and it was a really well-performing radio for its pocket size. However, I heard that the later SRF-39, 49, etc., that used an upgraded chip, slightly newer chip, 1 AA instead of 2, improved battery life. They offered better selectivity, better range. I had heard that they were better in every aspect, so I picked up an SRF-49 for not too expensive, and I was actually quite surprised when it sounded worse. I'll play 2 audio clips of each radio, same song, back to back, really quickly, so you can hear. If you're just using your phone or laptop or TV speakers, you probably won't be able to tell the two apart. However, if you're using headphones or earbuds or speakers that can hit lower frequencies, you probably notice that the SRF-49 actually couldn't reproduce lower frequencies. So, I was really curious on why this would be, because, well, the chip itself should have no effect on that. So, there must have been some change to the analog circuitry surrounding it. Luckily, Sony used to love us, and they used to provide wonderfully detailed schematics with block diagrams and labeled values for every component for even the most minute piece of hardware, like a $20 Walkman. These were $20 when they were new. And yes, it was once in fact feasible to fix something that was $20 instead of buying a new one from AliExpress. So I spent a little while poring over these schematics, wondering what on earth could have changed, and it's actually unbelievably simple, and it also makes zero sense why Sony changed it in the first place. So I've got our 2 schematics here. We've got the SRF-19 on top and the... So I've got 2 schematics here. I've got the SRF-29 here and the SRF-39. And while there's a lot going on here, both radios, as shown in the block diagrams, feature 2 ICs, the radio receiver and a smaller amplifier, and a whole ton of tiny little components strewn across the board to support their functionality. However, I started from the end of the signal, the output at the headphones, and worked backwards, and I pretty much immediately found the problem doing this. Now, there's a pair of what are called output capacitors, and I'm going to circle these right here on the SRF-39. Now, if we go over to the SRF-29, those same output capacitors are still in the same place, right before the headphone jack. However, if you take a look at their values, that is why the SRF-39 sounds worse. The SRF-29 uses a pair of 220 microfarad electrolytic capacitors right before the headphones. And, however, the SRF-39 uses a pair of 47 microfarad electrolytic capacitors right before the output. And that is less than a quarter of the value. So I figured, hey, that very well may be the problem. I grabbed a pair of 470 microfarad capacitors, matched them pretty closely, soldered them in, and the SRF49 now sounds just as good as the SRF29. So the only limiting factor across the massive number of factors that were changed between the two radios, different chip, different voltages, different amplifier chip that comes after the main radio chip even, the only factor that actually influences the tone of the sound are these two tiny electrolytic output capacitors. So when I modify one of these Walkman radios, I desolder the two 47 microfarads, and I solder in a pair of 470s. And that significantly extends the bass response because, well, there's more signal to work with. Sound is electricity. The sound that comes out of the headphone jack is still electricity. It's a tiny little electrical impulse. And lower frequency electrical impulses are wider. The wave is longer. So, if your capacitor isn't large enough, it can't store those big waves as much. And that is a really oversimplified and, still barely correct explanation, but that's essentially what's happening. That's just my analogy. So when you replace that capacitor with one that is more than large enough, it sounds so much better. You can replace it with a 220, you can replace it with the 330, just make sure the values are closely matched, and just more than 47. And I'll show you the modification process and like the tools that I use in a couple minutes. But first I'm going to talk about what radios you can actually do this to. So the part number of this chip here on the SRF39, which was the first to use this new chip, is the CXA1129N. That is Sony's proprietary low-voltage radio IC used in, first, the SRF39. There are a lot of radios that use it, actually. The SRF 36, 39, 46, 49, 56, 59. There is not an SRF 69, tragically, or at least I don't think there is. They switched to a naming scheme based on 80 in the future. Like the Walkman SRF S80, S85, I think there's an S84. You can do it to any Walkman that uses this chip. You just need to find the schematics, which are readily available online in Sony's service manual. You need to find the pair of output capacitors, which are the capacitors in every model that come right before the headphone jack. That's how you identify them. Don't replace any other capacitors. And in all of the radios that I've worked on, the capacitors are one away in their labeling on the board. So for example, they're C32 and C33 on the SRF 39. On the SRF 29, they are also C32 and C33. So don't just replace the first two 47s you find. If it's like C18 and C22 or something, those are not the right ones, and you're going to cause a problem with your radio. So, yeah, just make sure you replace the right ones. Another modification that you can do, and I haven't noticed a significant difference, if at all a difference from doing this, but you can actually replace the battery decoupling capacitor. And that just gives a more steady stream of power to your CXA1129 chip. This is not necessary. However, if you want to, it can help, especially if you're going for more bass response. Having a more steady stream of power to the chip would be beneficial. Okay. I think it would be here on the SRF 39. Let's check the other to make sure I'm right. Yeah, Yeah. Okay. So these are what are called battery decoupling capacitors. So anytime you see on the schematic a capacitor between the battery and something that requires power, you can go ahead and replace that with a larger value. So yeah, it's a smaller one actually on the SRF 29 than it is on the 39. But on the 39, it's right here. It's C31. It is 330 microfarads. And I went ahead and I replaced that with, I think, a 1000. Just for smoother, even power. But anyway, now the radios that you should not do this to are, for example, the SRF 19W. I've got a schematic for it here. And I'm going to show you why some of these Walkmans aren't a good candidate for the mod. So this is older than the 29, as the name would suggest. Who could have guessed? And this is significantly more complicated. It has way more external components. That means not only outside of the radio, but that means components that aren't like, well, I guess supplemental would be a better word. Components that serve functions that the radio IC doesn't. So you'll notice that there are 1, 2, 3 individual ICs in this radio, thus necessitating a messier, busier PCB. There's a whole lot more you have to work with, but if we just trace the headphone signal here, you don't have the same problem. You don't have the same output capacitor setup that all of the later Walkmans do. There's not capacitors after this little amplifier that would influence the sound if you replaced them. Yes, there's, let's see, 34 and 35, 22 6.3, 22 6.3. But those aren't connected to the outputs. Those are connected to other pins. Pins 1 and pin 8, they don't go into the headphones. So you can't do the same mod to this Walkman because it doesn't have those capacitors in the same place. And it's also a messier board. There's a lot more inside the case of this Walkman. So that just goes to highlight that anything with the CXA 1129 chip you can do these mods to, but don't do them to anything else, and don't try to. But anyway, let me show you the process of actually doing this and how simple it is.